Commander Tarsuk swirled his glowing amber brew, the liquid shimmering like molten gold as it reflected the dim, iridescent glow of the nebula's respite bar. His upper pair of arms, etched with intricate service tattoos, rested casually on the counter of polished volcanic glass, while his lower pair, still raw with plasma-burned scars, adjusted his perch on a grav chair with fluid precision. The faint hum of his ornate battle harness brushing against the counter drew the stares of a cluster of jittery recruits huddled near the back wall, their wide, luminous eyes betraying their failed attempts at discretion. Tarsuk's mandibles twitched in amusement. "By the twin suns, stop skulking and get over here," he rumbled, his voice a deep, resonant growl that carried the weight of countless campaigns. "Your sneaking skills will make a Terran snort, and believe me, you don't want that kind of humiliation." The recruits stumbled forward in a tangle of limbs and eager scales, their faces flashing hues of teal and violet with a mix of awe and chagrin. Tarsuk counted 9 of them, fresh from the training moons, their sleek tunics unmarred by combat sigils. "Commander," piped up the tallest, a wiry female with crimson-tipped scales named Clyra, "is it true you clashed with the Terrans at the siege of Cordon's Vale?" Tarsuk let out a bark of laughter that rattled the nearby tables. "Clashed? Hatchling. I tried to crush them first. That's how I came to admire them and dread them." He downed his drink in one gulp, signaling the multi-limbed bartender, a grizzled Vork with a dozen blinking eyes, for a refill. "But, Commander," a smaller recruit squeaked, his voice barely audible over the bar's ambient hum, "our holobriefs list Terrans as tier for combatants, soft-skinned, no exoshells, laughable sensory range." Tarsuk slammed all 4 fists onto the counter, sending a ripple through the glassware. "Holobriefs penned by desk-bound scholars who've never watched a Terran guzzle something called hot sauce just to prove a point. Or, stars forbid, slam a double-shot latte before charging into a firefight." He gave an exaggerated shudder, drawing uneasy chuckles from the group. Clyra dragged over a grav chair, her scales glinting like polished ruby. "Commander! Please, what are they really like? The reports feel hollow." "Hollow," Tarsuk snorted, accepting his fresh drink with a nod. "That's like calling a neutron lance a sparkler. Listen up, fledglings, because this might just keep you alive, or at least spare you the shame of underestimating a species that treats exhaustion like a warm-up stretch." He leaned back, the scars on his harness catching the shifting lights, and the recruits edged closer, their frills quivering with anticipation. Even the bartender paused, his many eyes flickering toward the commander as he spoke. "It was 4 orbits back, just before the Grand Concordance. I commanded the 19th Krezer Strike Armada. Yes, the one your simulators drone on about. We thought we ruled the void." He paused, mandibles clacking with wry humor. "We were so spectacularly, absurdly mistaken. But you earned your crest of resilience in that campaign," Clyra interjected, pointing to the tattoos curling around his upper arms. "Indeed," Tarsuk grinned. "Earned it by not dying long enough to realize our entire doctrine was about to get shredded. We Krezer thrive on precision, flawless formations, calculated strikes." He gestured at the recruit's pristine insignia. "Then we ran into a species that turned mayhem into a masterpiece." A tiny recruit, barely past his first molt, raised a shaky claw. "Is it true they fight even when their limbs snap?" Tarsuk's 4 eyes blinked in a ripple of mirth. "Snap? I saw a Terra mechanic patch a breach reactor with shattered leg, a punctured lung, and something they called a migraine, which, by the way, is a self-inflicted agony they shrug off for sport." The bar grew hushed, patrons drifting nearer, though Tarsuk feigned ignorance, a trick honed over years of spinning tales. "But that's not the worst of it," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. "The worst is their banter mid-battle. You haven't tasted terror until you've heard Terran chatter crackling through your comms while they board your ship." The recruits exchanged wary glances, their scales flickering nervously. Clyra's frills flared slightly. "Commander, are you say we should fear them?" Tarsuk swirled his drink, all 4 eyes narrowing. "Respect them? Without doubt. Fear their potential when cornered? Absolutely. But above all," he bared his jagged fangs in a grin, "fear what they'll show you about your own limits when you stand with them." Our first scrape with Terrans, Tarsuk straightened, resting all four arms on the counter, taught us our precious tactical codices were worth less than the data slates they were etched on. Clyra tilted her head. The Draconis Rift ambush? Exactly, he nodded. We had a flotilla of 27 ships. P-Krezer Warhulks, each one able to slag a planetoid to ash. We were hunting what we thought was a stray supply drone near the Rift's edge. Instead, we found the TFS Vanguard, under Captain Elias Marrow. A recruit gasped. The Rift Phantom himself? The same, Tarsa confirmed, mandibles twitching with the memory. Back then, we didn't know his legend. Just saw a lone Terran craft, barely a third the size of our lightest frigate. I figured it'd be an easy snare. He chuckled, the sound laced with rueful awe. I sent 3 ships to box him in and broadcasted our standard submission demand. Their reply? A deafening burst of noise, something they called heavy metal, blaring through our channels. The bartender, now openly listening, rumbled, "Noise during combat?" "Not just noise," Tarsa corrected, shaking his head. Later, I learned it was a track called Thunder Hubris. Marrow had a twisted sense of humor. Before we could recalibrate, the Vanguard pulled a maneuver no rational fleet would dream of. They barreled straight at my flagship. "That's madness," Clyra blurted. "Their hull would have crumpled under our barrage." "That's what my second-in-command said," Tarsuk replied, "right until they started weaving. Marrow had tweaked their grav thruster for moves that should have pulped their crew. They spiraled, flipped, and darted through our firing arcs like a crazed meteor swarm, all while that music hammered our comms. Our targeting arrays, built for predictable vectors, couldn't keep up. He traced their wild path with his upper claws, the recruits staring in disbelief. We had the numbers. A recruit ventured. Surely that led to us blasting our own hulls, Tarsuk cutting grimly. In the confusion, 2 of our ships scored hits on each other trying to tag the Vanguard. And Marrow? He was cackling over an open line. He took a slow sip, eyes glazing briefly. Then came the kicker. While we flailed, they jettisoned what our scans flagged as wreckage, until it turned out to be stealth mines with pulse jammers. By the time we caught on, a third of our fleet was drifting blind, the rest dodging their own dead husks. And there was Marrow, finally hailing us properly, looking like he'd just finished a leisurely sparring match. "Nice try," he said. "Want to talk terms, or should we go for round 2? The recruits erupted in shaky laughter, scales shifting with unease and wonder. But the wildest part, Tarsuk went on, not a single ship was lost outright. No casualties. He crippled a superior force without spilling blood. Years later, I asked him why. He said, "Dead foes don't share drinks later, and you lot seem worth a toast." He was right. That day rewrote everything we knew about Terrans, unhinged, sure, but with a strange grace in chaos, a knack for turning flaws into victories. Clyra's frills pulsed thoughtfully. "Is that why our codices now mention Terran sound weapons?" "Partly," Tarsuk chuckled, "though it's useless. They churn out new tricks faster than we can log them. Marrow's still out there, running seminars at their Warspire Academy. Uses our little dance as a case study. How to baffle and befriend. Last I heard, he'd added a module on syncing combat drones to old Terran drum solos. He adjusted his harness, the tattoos glinting. But space was just a prelude. Ground wars? That's where we saw their real mettle. The Scarif planes clash flipped our view of Terran biology upside down. We'd pegged them as fragile, endurance hunters at best, Tarsuk said, signaling for another round. Then came Corporalina Voss and the Scarif showdown. It was meant to be a clean sweep, a fledgling Terran outpost on a hellscape world. Razor winds, toxic dust clouds, ground that'd melt your boots 1 hour and freeze them the next. Our enviro gear was cutting edge, rated for 90 hours. The Terrans? Patchwork respirators and flimsy heat cowls, barely armor. We thought they'd crack in a day. He let out a raspy laugh. They didn't just hold, they thrived. Our drop pods hit during a dust tempest, perfect for us, or so we assumed. Voss and her militia had spent months mastering that nightmare terrain, turning its fury into their shield. Clyra's scales shimmer with intrigue. Barscan said Terrans need constant rest and supply drops. Scans. Tarsuk Bart, slapping the counter. Voss's crew ran 6 days straight on something called adrenaline shots and sheer grit. 6 days, no sleep, just fighting. The smallest recruits' frills flattened in shock. 6 days? And not just awake, Tarsuk grinned. Ambushing. They cracked how to move blind in the dust, using what they called wind whispers, feeling air shifts and echoes. Our optics? Useless. They'd vanish into the storms, then hit us with salvage gear corroded by the wind itself. They weaponized the planet. Tarsuk continued. Rigged dust clouds to spoof our sensors. Used acid geysers to melt our drone circuits. Voss once popped out a thermal vent. Should have cooked her alive, grinning like a predator, hefting a wounded teammate over one shoulder while lobbing grenades with the other. 3 days she hauled that soldier through the chaos, belting out a tune called Running Down a Dream. How? Their frames shouldn't take it. He leaned in, voice low. She told me later. Limits are just suggestions. We argue with M. Utter lunacy, but that's Terrans. The turning point came on day 7. We had them pinned at their bunker, our suits failing, morale in tatters. Then Voss's voice crackled over our comms. Fancy a truce over some tea? We've got a kettle on. We thought it was a ploy. It wasn't. She met us at the gate, battered but beaming, and served us a bitter brew she swore kept her sharp. Showed us their jury-rigged tech, even offered to trade tips. Why help us? I asked. She shrugged. Live enemies can learn. Dead ones just rot. Plus, you fought well in this pit. Their morale? Nightly story circles, swapping tales over static-ridden comms to drown out the pain. Nearly lost us the planes to a bunch of dust-choked Terrans trading yarns in a death trap. The bar's lights dimmed, matching Tarsuk's shift to a graver tone. But the war's crux wasn't about wins. It was sacrifice. The Darvon relay siege showed us that. Our top comms hub, overrun by the Virid swarm. 5,000 techs trapped inside. The Terran frigate Eclipse got there first, carrying Ensign Terrakel and her riggers. The Terrakel who cracked Grav shield phasing. A recruit asked, frills buzzing. Her. Tarsuk nodded, tracing a scar with a claw. Back then, just a wiry tech with a soda obsession. They dock without orders, reckless, we thought. Kel saw the relay's layout and said, These ducks are begging for a stealth run. Toxic fumes clogged them from Virid strikes. She just grinned, got masks and a stopwatch. Good enough. She paired her crew with our troops, 1 Terran, 1 Krezer. A mess at first, Tarsuk admitted. They kept joking about some mission, improbable flick. We clung to chain of command. Kel bridged it, turned their quips into orders we could parse, our rituals and details they got. When the Virid hit the core, she saw the shield grid could pulse to fry their swarm link. Problem was, it needed manual rewiring in a rad-soak chamber. Our brass said no. Suicide, Tarsuk murmured. Kel eyed them and said, Math's done, and I've got enough fizz in me to outrun a starburst. I'm in. She played it light, but her look at us, Terran and Krezer, said it all. Been a blast. Folks, sorry you never got my soda obsession. Her last signal was her humming, sweet escape, while she patched the grid. It worked. Virid ship stalled. Drones dropped. Saved 4,000 souls. But it wasn't just lives. Kel showed us their chaos, their jibes, their quirks, was how they faced the abyss. She died grinning, easing our grief. After that, we stopped forcing Terrans into our mold and learned theirs. They gave us levity. We gave them structure, became more than allies, kin. He raised his glass. The Kel Phase Grid's manual has a line, fueled by grit, fizz, and perfect timing. We toast her yearly with soda and off-key songs. She'd love it. And their sharpest blade? Tarsuk's tone lifted. Their minds. Take the Thrime Nexus standoff. Outmatched, surrounded, 0 odds. Then they blast this absurd tune, the Funky March, and start strutting in formation mid-battle. Our systems, wired for patterns, choke trying to predict it. They'd sync their deflectors to the beat. Our shots slid off. The footage spread. Soon every Krezer saw Terrans treating doom like a jest. Shattered our discipline. How you fight a foe who might break into a jig. They named ships TFS Nope or HMS Lookaway. Threw our targeting into fits. At Voron's Hold, they swapped our alerts for fun grooves. At Kellis Prime, they peppered comms with pun bombs. Drones dubbed Marge or Lenny apologizing as they fired. Their laughter, it's a force. Joy, defiance, madness, it unravels you. He grinned. Last push of the war, their admiral told her crew, play your part, keep it lively. The galaxy's watching. Us, the audience. Every clash a saga. Scars a punchline. My medic offered to doodle stars on my wounds for flair. That's their genius. Turning war into whimsy, foes into partners. The bar fell silent, patrons hanging on Tarsik's words. The true signing? Pure Terran. They threw a star bash on their hub, grilled meats, low-grav games. Captain Marrow tricked our elders into tasting spicy glaze. Voss taught our guard skyball. Kel's riggers tweaked the grav for a dance zone. Treaty was 50 pages. Last one just said, Krezer and Terrans vow to rock it and roll with it. Our envoys balked. Terran said it was the heart of it, and it was serious wrapped in silly. They invited us to vid nights after, shared their spirit. Taught us war's a stage, peace a feast. His voice hardened. But don't mistake it, they're lethal. That mirth hides will like neutronium. Better friends and foes. He stood, harness agleam. Face them in drills, remember. They're never as frail as they look. Their havocs deliberate, their chuckles a blade. Hear them laugh? Run or join. Running fails. They love the hunt. Joining? You'll star in their yarn. And if they offer a fist bump post-fight, take it. We lost 2 cycles thinking it was a duel. He eyed the recruits. You'll train with them from day one. Learn their soul. It's what makes them unstoppable. Not tech, not stamina, but joy in the fray, bond from the fallout. He headed for the door, humming a Terran ditty. Marrow's hosting a jam session. Says I gotta nail the woo-woo bit. No clue why, but I'll learn.